Hello audience, Mr. Z here, and today we'll be discussing the Second Sino Japanese War, conflict often misunderstood as just another stage for the Second World War, but it's a bit more complicated than that. For outside of the Axis Allied powers dynamic, there were smaller factions within China vying for supremacy. The two you're probably most familiar with would be the nationalists and the communists, but one other faction you may not be as familiar with would be Manchukuo, or the new Empire of Manchuria, led by the original Chinese Emperor Puyi. Puyi would be allied to the Japanese, along with the reorganized Republic of China, which agreed to accept Japanese rule in exchange for the removal of the communists. The nationalists, communists, and a number of regional warlords would form the United Chinese Front in opposition. Summarize, the Second Sino Japanese War is not simply a conflict of freedom against authoritarianism, or the defenders against an aggressor, but it's one in which each side has significant drawbacks. On the side of the Chinese United Front, you get the independence of China, but the continuation of serious conflicts and divisions brought about by numerous claims to power, which would ultimately lead to the communists taking power. While on the other hand, you could allow China to become a puppet state of the Japanese, but see a restoration of order, security, and authority. There's little to no chance of the communists nor the Islamic Q Chinese supporting the Japanese efforts, as these were the two groups primarily antagonized by the empire. However, as far as ethnic minorities go, the Japanese were fairly successful in gaining the support of the Mongolians, Tibetans, and other smaller groups sympathetic to the Japanese cause. So, if we were to assume that Japan and its Chinese collaborators managed to gain greater support for their cause, and promote it as a peaceful existence under the empire, either by dealing a massive blow to the United Front's war effort, by crushing morale, or by ensuring a peaceful resolution, this could come about possibly during the kidnapping of Chiang Kai-shek, when he was encouraged to cease conflicts with the communists and focus on Japan. If in this timeline Japan's offers made more favorable to the Chinese, this negotiation could be made into one of Shek siding with the Japanese over the communists. However, regardless of how it's achieved, China and Japan would still need to deal with a significant communist presence, which is only being further supplemented by the neighboring Soviet Union. If Chiang Kai-shek agreed to accept Japan's terms and conditions, this would leave the majority of nationalist China under the control of the reformed Chinese Republic, with parts of it being divided amongst Puyi's empire and Japan. It would lay claim to all remaining territory held by non-cooperative warlords. Together, Japan and its client states would go on to wage war against communists and warlords, who in this timeline would remain disunited and be far more easily defeated. That is, however, until the Soviet Union further involves itself in the conflict, eventually pulling it into the war with Japan, and in turn Germany, who would need to fight a two-front war even earlier. However, may use its non-aggression pact to forestall that event. However, it is eventually going to happen. This time, though, with an even more powerful Japanese empire leading a push in from the Far East, it's also important to note that in this timeline, with its resources focused on the USSR, Japan likely avoids attacking Pearl Harbor and reaching for Australia, keeping the prior out of the war and giving the Australians less motivation to fight in the Pacific. The Japanese would push deeper into British India, freeing numerous anti-war and pro-independence prisoners, thus sparking widespread dissent and disorganization within the subcontinent. Fearing a full conquest of India by the Japanese and not seeing the US entering the war anytime soon, Britain would realize that it's at a stalemate with Germany, and pushing on would only mean the loss of one of its most valuable colonial holdings, as well as others in Africa and the Near East, thus leading Britain to sign a peace treaty with Germany, accepting that the war will continue on solely against communist Russia, and will mean the liberation of Norway and France from German occupation. The Axis would agree to these terms, and focus would be directed solely upon the Soviets, a conflict which, even after the capturing of Moscow and Petrograd, would linger years after through means of guerrilla warfare and mass sabotage, as similarly seen during the Russian Civil War. Germany would lay claim to the western half and establish a massive neutral zone between it and Japanese-occupied territory, an area which Japan would establish as Greater Asia and would break up into numerous client states for particular regional or ethnic groups, including the new Chinese Republic and Greater Qing Empire. These territories would be recognized externally as having a status identical to that of commonwealths for the Japanese Empire, but in truth were mere puppet governments with little to no real military might or external influence of their own. The people within these states who live more or less blissfully ignorant lives would likely never even notice the difference. However, dissidents and troublemakers would certainly be punished harshly, and possibly made a public example of, or simply labeled a communist and discredited. Animosity will no doubt still exist between the US government toward the Axis, and Japan may only grow increasingly wary of the American and British experiments in the Pacific. If the US and UK were able to develop some type of, say, secret weapon, they could easily use Hawaii or the Philippines as a launching off point, and, well, we can't have that now, can we? Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more. Mr. Z, out.